Hello everybody. This is going to be the first lesson in a introduction to synthesizers. Today we're going to be going over wavetables, oscillators, filters and envelopes. There'll be several lessons in this little mini course, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have a substantial knowledge of how to use both synthesizers and any other synthesizers you may come across to a respectable degree. So we'll move on quickly. So an introduction to synthesis. Synthesis is a vast, exciting world of sonic discovery. So what I mean by sonic discovery is just the act of discovering new sounds. And that will help lead the way to an infinite amount of unique sounds and colours. So in this context here, I'm referring to something which we call tone colouring, which is a way to subjectively measure the characteristics of a sound. So this course will take you through the basics of synthesis, how to start creating your own sounds, and how to work the synthesizers in the first place. This course will be focusing on two popular software synthesizers, Negative Instruments Massive X and Xford's Serum. There was debate as to whether I should be using Massive over Massive X, given the popularity of the original Massive roughly 10 years ago. But I've decided to go for Massive X, given it's a more up-to-date synthesizer, and I think there's potential for it to offer more. So starting off with Massive X, it's a subtractive wavetable synthesizer. It comes packed with a bunch of unique effects, waveforms, filters, and a lot of various modulators. Now, I want to stress at this stage, if you're not sure of any term, don't worry about it. By the time we finish this course, you'll be an expert. The user interface can be complicated and very intimidating to look at. But again, don't worry about this. We'll go through it step by step. We'll go through what each segment means, what its role is, and how you can use it to create your sound. Moving on to Serum. So Serum is arguably the most popular software synthesizer. It allows you to use your own samples as wavetables, which means that if you are an avid field recorder, for example, you can use Foley samples to give your sound a little bit more of an edge. Plenty of opportunity for expansions and modulators. So again, if you're not too sure what I mean by any of this, just hang fire. Throughout the course, we'll go over what every single term means. And again, don't worry about the UI, you'll understand all of it soon enough. So what is subtractive synthesis? Well, subtractive in the context of synthesizers literally means to subtract from a sound. So the way I like to see it is if you have a big marble slab and you're chipping away from it to create a statue. So a raw oscillator sound has plenty of harmonic content and it can sound fairly harsh and abrasive. Default sound of Massive X sounds like this. So it's got this very grating quality to it. It's very piercing. This is in part to do with the waveform we have selected, but just for comparison purposes. So yeah, we remove some of this content to morph our sound. As I stated before, it's almost like making a statue from a stone block. We typically subtract via the use of filters, but FX and processing are just as important. So we'll start off at the start of the signal chain with our oscillator, also sometimes called a VCO. So oscillators are what produce the sound generated by your synth. They oscillate back and forth in a specific user-defined pattern, also known as our waveform, in order to generate the sound. So an oscillator is what typically starts the signal path. Oscillators typically have plenty of parameters associated with them, which can look overwhelming, but again, as I've stated many times so far, we will go over this. You can also adjust how an oscillator reads the wavetable presented to it, offering a wildly different result depending on the wave. So here we have the Massive X interface. You can see here, this segment here highlighted in blue is where you can find both of your oscillators. And in green, that marks the second oscillator. So this section here in blue is oscillator 1, and this section here in green is oscillator 2. They have an identical set of functions and perform identically. There's no difference between oscillators unless you set them to be different. So looking at the Serum interface here, this is where you will find your first oscillator, and this is where you will find your second oscillator. So again, they've got quite a fairly central location here. As you can see here on this second oscillator here, oscillator B, it's currently not turned on. So if we just go back a couple of steps, you can see it's grayed out. That is not producing any sound. That is not sending anything down the signal path. You can't quite do this on Massive X. You have to keep the volume lowered. So this little knob here that says 4 on it, I don't know if you can see that. That determines the volume of the oscillator. So let's move on. Okay, so the basics of oscillation on Massive X. We have a screenshot of the first oscillator in Massive X. Remember, all the parameters here are identical on the second oscillator. So here we have the wavetable that's selected, or the name of the wavetable. You can also click on this to change the wavetable. Here, this little white rectangle determines the wavetable position. This slider here represents the volume of the oscillator. This here represents the pitch adjustment. This represents the fine pitch adjustment. This is the oscillator's own built-in filter. And here is the phase controller. So a phase controller, it essentially tells the oscillator where to start the waveform from. You don't always have to start at the start and end at the end. So this is what we call phase. Every other parameter on here is a little bit too ahead of ourselves for the time being, but we will go into the oscillators again at a later date, and then we can start going through what all this extra jargon is. So here with Serum, we've got oscillator A. So similarly again, here's the oscillator name and the on and off switch. So we can see this is oscillator A. The square is ticked, it's blue, it means it's on. That means if we press down a key, it will produce sound. So here we have the wavetable name and the selection. So here we just have the default wavetable. We can click on this to bring down a drop-down menu of all of our wavetables that we can use. Here is your pitch adjustment, so we can adjust it by octave, via semitones, or we can fine-tune it by cents. Here is the visual waveform, so this is a visual representation of what your wave is doing. It's not really essential for a synthesizer, but it does give a nice insight as to what it is doing. The number of voices here. So this control here essentially determines how many voices the oscillator is pushing through. So if it's just one voice, it's performing the wave once. If it's two, it's doing it twice, and so on. The oscillator on Massive X doesn't have this on the oscillator. You have to go into a separate location, but again, we will cover that. So voice detune. If you have more than one voice, you can select the other voices there to be detuned ever so slightly. This can really help kind of thicken out a sound if need be, or just offer this really kind of this wacky effect if you would like. A voice blend, this determines the level of the extra voices as opposed to the primary one. So if your voice blend is all the way up, then your extra voices will be sounding a lot louder than the main one, and if your blend is all the way down, your main voice will be sounding a lot louder than the other ones. So if you have a lot of detune going on, it's a good way to kind of fine adjust things and just, kind of mix them together a little bit. Your phase control is found here. So as we said before, this determines where it will start to read the waveform. And here you can find your wavetable position. So again, a wavetable is essentially a it's something that we can shift through to kind of change the characteristics of our sound. It's the way to think of it is kind of like a 3D sound wave, and I will show an example of this on Serum very shortly. So next up, we're going to go on to one of the most important aspects of subtractive synthesizers, and that is a filter. So what exactly is a filter? Well, filters are a tool which we use to remove unwanted frequencies and or enhance the ones that we want. So they mainly come in two forms. So you have your low pass filters and your high pass filters. So a low pass filter allows lower frequencies through whilst blocking the higher the higher frequencies, and a high pass filter blocks the lower frequencies and allows the higher frequencies to go through. So filters are the main tool of subtraction in subtractive synthesizers, and both Massive X and Serum do offer a wide range. Now, I do just want to say LPS and HPS aren't the only form of filter you can find on both of these, but again, it's such a huge topic, we will have to visit it another time. So here we have both the interfaces again. You can find your filter section here on Massive X, and you can find it here on Serum. So if we have a look at the default filter on Massive X, it is a Asimov filter. There are plenty of other options again which do various different things, but the Asimov filter gives you a nice balance of high pass filter and low pass filter if you want that. So you can change the actual function of the filter here by just clicking where it says LP4. So yeah, we'll start with the filter name, which is there at the top. The filter type, so there we can see it's a LP4, so it means it's a low pass, and I think 4 represents the kind of severity, the drop off. Here you have your resonance, so I will go over what resonance means on Serum shortly. Your frequency cutoff, which is there, and then your gain and your frequency modulation, which is just there too. So yes, as I said, there are far too many included filters on both Massive X and Serum to go over just in this session alone, and we will be looking at filters a little bit more in depth a bit further down the line. So if we have a look at Serum here, again, you have your on and off toggle there represented by the blue square, your filter selection and name, so this is where you would change your filter, and here's your visual graph. So it gives a nice visual representation. So here you have your oscillator selection. So you have A, B, N, and S. So here you can select which oscillators you want sent to this filter. So at the moment we have oscillator A, but if we have oscillator B activated and we didn't have this checked, oscillator B would just go straight out. It would bypass the filter. And this is the same with the noise oscillator and the sub oscillator as well. But don't worry about these two. We'll get onto these another time. So here's your frequency cutoff, your resonance, and your drive, as well as the mix parameter just there. So envelopes. Envelopes are primarily a form of modulation, but in this session we'll talk about the main voice envelope, also known as envelope 1 on both synthesizers. So envelopes work on a system of ADSR, which is attack, decay, sustain, and release. This is the fundamental way an envelope reads the data. These parameters can be altered dramatically to change the overall character of your sound. So attack describes how quickly it takes for your sound to go from zero noise to peak loudness. A long attack will have a long fade in type sound, whereas a short attack will be very punchy and snappy. So if we go over here to Serum, we can see here we are at envelope 1. We have a low attack. So if we press a key, make sure record is enabled, you can hear there it hits its peak loudness very, very quickly. But if we were to raise this attack, and we can see here it's now sloped up, we can now hear that we have this fade in type effect. So attack is probably one of the most important parameters there, because it can really make the difference between whether you want your sound to be a kind of pad or like a short sort of stab. So if we go for like that, I was clipping a little bit there, so I apologize for your ears. Or if we go for a low attack again, peak loudness straight away. What is kind of good practice here is to raise the attack ever so slightly to avoid any clicks and pops at the start. And yeah, so we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So short attacks can often result in clicks and pops, as I just mentioned, so it's good practice to always raise the attack slightly to counteract this. Decay. So decay is a measure of how quickly your attack lowers in volume to the sustain value. A high decay means after hitting peak loudness it will gradually lower to a lower volume. And a low decay means after hitting peak loudness it will quickly lower in volume. So decay is depending on the synthesizers on setting a value for sustain. If sustain matches the peak attack volume, then there will be no decay. So we'll quickly go through what sustain means, and then I'll give a practical demonstration of what it is I mean there, because there was a lot of words, probably a lot of them didn't really make sense. So sustain is a measure of how long the sound will continue for after the decay, and at what volume. So sustains can be programmed to last until the key is released, which means if you hold down a key, it will just keep on playing forever. It won't trigger the release until you take your finger off the key. So sustain can be the same volume as peak, or it can be lowered. So if we go back over to logic here real quick, so we can see here we have our sustain parameter there, and at the moment it is the same as our peak attack volume. So our sustain matches the loudest volume of the sound. If we didn't want that, if we wanted the attack to get louder and then drop off again, we can lower this, and as you can see there, the curve is starting to go down quite substantially. And we'll just bring this across just for visual purposes. So this curve here is what the decay is doing. So if we want our sound after it's hit the peak loudness to slowly go down to this normal volume, then we will have a high decay. So as you can see there, it takes now about 2 seconds to get down to this other volume. So if we press a key, go. And once it hits this area here, this is where the sustain value is. So it will sustain at this level here until you take your finger off the key. If we wanted a quick decay, there you go. You can hear that just there. It very quickly snaps down to the sustain volume. So lastly, we have the release. So a release is a measure of how long it takes for the volume to return to 0 decibels after the sustain. So you can kind of think of it as a reverse attack. Attack is a measure of how long it takes to get to the loudest volume, and a release is a measure of how long it takes to get down to 0. So a short release means a sound will quickly return to 0 and it'll have a short tail. And a long release means a sound will fade out more slowly. So if we go back over here, let's get our attack up again. Let's get our sustain up there. Let's give it a bit of a longer decay so you can see the waveform. Not the waveform, the envelope. So if we have a quick release, let's say a couple of milliseconds, you can hear there, once I let go of the key, it just returns to silence very, very quickly. Sometimes we don't want that. Sometimes we want it to last quite a while. So me, when I'm doing atmospheric pads and so on, I'll set it to sometimes upwards of 10 seconds. And you can see here, it's even gone off the edge of the chart there. So yeah, let's give this a listen. After we released the key from the sustain, it slowly faded down into silence. Again, you know, if we wanted a quick release, kind of fading out that way, And yeah, we can also change how the release shape works. So we can have it dropping off a little bit more quickly, or we can have it dropping off a little bit more slowly, and so on, so forth. Same with the decay there. You know, you can change these around into loads and loads and loads of different shapes. Same goes with the attack. And yeah, so let's go back to the presentation. So envelopes continued. Here you have both of your interfaces again. So you can find your envelope section in Massive X here. So these three here are all different envelopes. So you've got your amplitude envelope, your modulation envelope, and a exciter envelope, as measured by E1, E2, and E3. And yeah, this is where you can find your amp envelope in Massive X. And here again in Serum, you've got envelope 1, 2, and 3. So you would select between them, and this is where you would find your envelopes. So let's look through the envelopes in Massive X. Here is where you'd find your attack. Here is your decay. Your sustain there. So I've coloured this arrow red so you can just see it. So at this value, it will sustain until the key is released. So this means if you hold down the key, it will go forever because it's at max value. And here is your release. And here is a visual graph just telling you what it is your envelope is doing. So here you can see that we have a fast attack, we have no decay, we have our sustain, which is going to go on indefinitely, and a relatively quick release. So if we go over to Massive X again, let's get this loaded up. See, look, same system here. I will lower the frequency cutoff on this filter ever so slightly, so we don't have a very harsh sound. So just for comparison, this is without the filter. This is with the filter. There you go. So it just takes the edge off. But okay, going back to the envelope. So if we wanted to have a more of a fade-in sound on Massive X, we would raise this knob here. Or really long fade-in. Now, if we wanted a long decay, we can set that there, but it's currently not going to do much because our sustain is right there. So if we lower our sustain down, okay. Just to clarify a mistake I just made, this doesn't determine how long the sound is going to be held for. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have said that. So a good way of getting a sound to not last forever is to simply bring the sustain all the way down, and then you can change the specifics with the attack and the decay. Is sort of acting like a release, but again, we'll get onto advanced modulation usage at another time. So here we've got a relatively slow attack, a relatively slow decay, a fairly long sustain. A fairly low sustain. You can see that it's brought the volume down, and a long release. So look, we can have this up to 100 seconds if we really wanted to. Let's listen to how insane this sounds. So yeah, that will fade out over the course of 100 seconds. Here you've got your envelope level, so this kind of determines the effect of the envelope on your actual sound. But again, this is more advanced envelope usage. We'll get onto that another time. Okay, so envelopes in Serum. This blue highlight here shows you which envelope is selected. Here is your visual graph, your attack and your hold. Here is your decay, your sustain, and release. So the hold knob here is simply a measure of how long that peak value of the attack is held before it hits the decay stage. So just to recap with the oscillators, oscillators are what produce the main sound in your synthesizer. They come with several parameters that can be modified to fine-tune your initial sound. They aren't representative of your final sound, but do offer a framework to build upon. So what I mean there is, of course, you're still going to have the characteristics of the waveform that you've selected. It's just that that first initial harsh and abrasive sound isn't necessarily going to be at all representative of what your final result is going to be, especially if you're working in atmospheric pads and so on. So a wavetable. So wavetables are the information the oscillator reads in order to produce a sound. So I'm going to go over to Serum here really quickly. So as you can see here, this waveform, it doesn't actually have a wavetable with it. It's just one particular wave. See, look, you can see that there. It's just that. But if we go into something, so there's one here I quite like. It's a PM Juno here. I really love this waveform. So this here is a visual representation of what the waveform is. So as you can see there, let me just get back off this. I didn't intend to click on that. As you can see here, so if we click off this view, if we go through the wavetable position, we can see that the waveform distorts and it becomes something completely different. So if I record enable Serum here, we are moving through the wavetable and we are changing the color of our sound as we go through it. So each little section here, look, as you can see, it moves through, is a different waveform that we can move. So this one here has 112 different selections that we can pick. Going from one to the other, it's not going to sound very different. But yeah, look, you can see there, it moves and it changes as you move through it. So yeah, wavetables are the information the oscillator reads in order to produce sound. Wavetables can be moved through to produce different sounds, and wavetables can be produced by any form of sound, so it can be Foley, electronic, organic, it can be anything that you want it to be. So let's go over filters. So filters are the main source of subtraction in these types of synthesizers. They come in many various forms, but you'll mainly be using low-pass filters to cut out that high-end content to get your sound to not sound as rough. And yes, we'll talk more about filters more in depth at another time. So let's recap for envelopes. So envelopes are a modulation tool built into synthesizers that work on four main parameters. You have your attack, sustain, decay, and release. The voice envelope determines how quickly your sound comes in and how fast it fades away. So let's go over Massive X. So Massive X is a popular wavetable synthesizer, and it typically tends to be popular because of its ease of use, its bountiful modulation potential, and quality effects. So Massive X can be purchased directly from Native Instruments for £179. I'm not too sure what that would equate to in USD. And yeah, there you go. There's a link to purchase the synth if you were interested. However, I would recommend going for Serum. So Serum is a synth that we will be focusing on going forward. We still will talk about Massive X going forward, but it's a lot easier to talk about Serum, and I'll tell you why. So Serum is a wavetable synthesizer. It's popular amongst producers of all genres. Serum can be bought on a rent-to-buy basis from Splice for around £8 per month, or purchased outright for around £120. So this is why we're going to be going through Serum, because it's just so much more accessible with the rent-to-buy system from Splice. I think it's one of those where if you miss a payment or if you want to pause your subscription, you can do it. You can continue it at any point. So that basically means you're not going to lose the money you've already put into it. It has excellent functionality and excellent choice of modulators, and there is a link to purchase it via Splice. So here's just some helpful terminology or nomenclature. So subtractive synthesis, the process of creating a sound via removal of content. sonic discovery, the process of finding new sounds, harmonic content, the presence of overtones within a sound, overtones, the notes heard above the fundamental note of a sound, modulators, tools we can use to automatically modulate parameters without user inputs, parameter, something we can use to alter the sound or its behavior. So a parameter is basically just any of these knobs here. So this is a parameter of the oscillator, this is a parameter of the envelope, and so on. Signal path is the route the signal takes from input to output. So next week we're going to be going over modulators. So yeah, join us next week for a session on what a modulator is and how we can assign them in both Massive X and Serum. So we're going to be looking at envelope modulation, low frequency oscillators, and other unique options offered by both synths. So we'll be primarily looking at these sections here, what all this means, and how to use the other envelopes. So thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for watching the video. I really hope that you did end up learning something. I'm by no means a expert at all. I'm still a student, much like you guys are. I'm constantly learning. This series is just a way to show you what it is that I've learned, how it is I've learnt it, and you know, just a way for you to learn from the things that I've learnt, as pretentious as that sounds. So yes, please join us next week. We'll be going through the modulators. It's going to be a very, very exciting